What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing hooded figures. And guys, okay, hooded figures kind of can be anything, and that's kind of the point. So, as usual, before I start repeating myself, let me just jump right into this script. Lately, if you've been following me and my channel for any stretch of time, you will know that I've been opening up a lot about the experiences my family and I are having with lots of unexplained sudden illnesses. Constant, recurring illnesses that seem to come from nowhere and have no logical or, it seems, after many trips to many different doctors and every test possible under the sun, no medical explanation either. Don't get me wrong, these are diagnosable things like sinus infections, anemia, and plain old anxiety, but here's my point. My family and I are a bunch of introverts. We rarely leave our house. How are these illnesses getting to one person, like the most contagious disease out there right now that I'm not allowed to talk about, in the first place? But also, how is only one person in the house catching it? If it is something contagious, it seems to never be passed on to the other person. Also, that's not even mentioning yet all of the sudden dizziness and nausea that completely incapacitates us and then is gone just as quickly as it came without any rhyme, reason, or explanation. I could go on and on, but the point of this video is not to talk about my family's medical conditions or health, but to aid in proving my point that these illnesses and sudden outbursts don't make much sense if you really think about it. The drastic weight loss I've experienced over and over again, like feeling and looking like I've lost 10 pounds literally overnight while I was sleeping, led me to a conclusion. I was being fed on. I am being fed on. I believe my family is too, and I know for a fact by my clients I work with personally on a weekly basis, and also just by some conversation with many of you, that we're not alone here, okay? This is kind of going on all over the place with so many different people, but they're not realizing that's what's going on. This led me to thinking about all of the hauntings and supernatural experiences we've been having lately in our separate homes, meaning myself, my family, my clients, and most of you guys. A lot of you are experiencing this stuff, and a lot of you are experiencing it for the first time as well. There's one commonality besides the sicknesses, and that's a hooded shadow figure which stalks the halls and stairways of our homes and leaves us in absolute terror every time it shows up. Usually in the middle of the night, and usually it seems to be just staring at us, and I have also come to the conclusion that it isn't so much staring as it is feeding. I'm under the belief and assumption at this point anyways that it's a jinn, for so many reasons I won't even mention here because I've already done several videos on shadow entities where jinn have come up, but there are many reasons not mentioned here as I'm saving them for a future video totally devoted just to this supernatural evil demonic entity from the Eastern world called jinn or genie or even demon. Let's be real. So what is Gemma babbling on about now, right? Well, I have recently come across many encounters with and a lot more information in my hunger to find out what this thing or these things are and how to get rid of and or stop them from feeding off of and terrorizing me and my family and you guys. If you all heard the live stream I did with my son on Monday, February 7th and listened to the EVPs we caught, it's obvious. And also, if you know me and my history, which I speak of very often and all the time, you will also know and understand that it isn't the only entity by far that's always lurking about and striking fear in our hearts and possibly causing us to be sick. But I truly believe this hooded shadow entity is at the very least the ringleader of all of it, like the main component in these sicknesses. Okay, let's get into the research. There are more than a couple of entities that I've come across either personally or with clients or even just speaking casually to friends that are described as being hooded figures. I don't believe all of them are evil, but there is a specific type that comes up time and time again that's very evil and very much lower vibrational energetically. Let's start with what are perhaps the most popular hooded figures that many of us not even think of as such because of something else far more terrifying about them, the black-eyed kids and their soulless gaze. However, if you think about it and go through as many stories as I have, or should I say encounters, you will realize that they are in fact, most of the time, hooded. Usually not in a dark cloak, at least not in the more modern experiences with them, but with the basic and usually raggedy looking, loose fitting hoodie. Here's an encounter to prove my point. You guys know I really don't like using real people's names, even though when they put the information out there, they use their real names. I don't want to put them out there like that. So Jane's encounter took place in 2012 and somewhat ironically in a place notorious for yet another mysterious and possibly evil entity, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Yes, I am speaking of the alleged harbinger of doom and red-eyed devil, the elusive and somewhat terrifying Mothman. Now, guys, I'm not saying he's evil, so don't attack me in the comments, okay? I'm going to get to him eventually in another video, but I found it quite disturbing that somehow in all of the places in all of the world, this encounter would take place here. So Jane worked some pretty irregular hours, and one Saturday when she didn't get home from work until 11 p.m., she decided to wind down by lying on her couch and watching some television to unwind. I know on Sundays when I put in a straight 19-hour workday, I cannot just stop and lay down and go to sleep. Like, you ever work a really long workday, whether if you work from home or not, and you come home and you're just like, I don't care if it's 2 a.m. Like, I can't sleep right now. I have to unwind. It was kind of like that type of thing. Anyways, Jane was laid back on her couch and just getting comfortable with a pizza and a few cold beers, winding down for the night and enjoying her own company. About half an hour into her nice, relaxing night, a very loud knock came at her door. Now, where I come from, this is called knocking like the cops. You know, you don't knock on someone's door like that where I come from, but that's what basically the sound was described as. It was super duper loud. It was so loud, in fact, that Jane jumped up, startled, and wondering who in the world would be knocking on her second-story apartment store at this time of night, because by now it was about midnight. She was even a little out of breath. I mean, we've all been there after a quick fright, and she crept to the door to look out of the peephole to see who in the world this could possibly be. She definitely wasn't expecting and hadn't invited anyone over, so she was really agitated now more than anything at whoever was banging so loudly on her door at this hour of the night. Because it's not like they were like, hey, excuse me, is anyone home? They were like pounding, like breaking the door down, pounding. There, through the peephole, she saw two very young boys wearing black hoodies and standing kind of awkwardly with their heads down. Jane latched the chain on her door and then opened it about an inch or two and asked if they were okay and what they needed. The two boys didn't move or answer her. They just continued standing there eerily still and staring at the ground with their hoodies up over their heads. So, hoods up, staring at the ground. She could see a little bit of their faces, but not much, and she suddenly had this overwhelming sense of dread and fear, something primal that she had never in her life felt before. Their skin was as white as paper, white as a ghost if you'll allow the pun. One of the kids suddenly spoke in a very robotic and monotone voice and simply said, "Food." He and his companion both looked up as he spoke, and that's when, to her horror, Jane saw that they both had black eyes, inky and black and as devoid of any color as any black hole in the galaxy, darker than the darkest night, and somehow she knew it was evil. When the boy spoke, he did so with such authority, though, that somehow Jane knew instinctively that this was more of a demand than anything else. He wasn't like, food? He was like, food. It was as if he expected her to just comply and open the door fully and provide them with some food. However, I don't think for 1 second they meant they wanted some of her pizza and or beer. Jane, somehow sensing this and in a sudden state of extreme terror and panic, slammed the door shut and ran as far away from the door as she could. She was still in her living room though, but she went to the farthest corner. She couldn't move anymore. She was just kind of frozen in fear. She was frozen in place just up against the wall as if somehow putting the distance between her and the kids would just make them go away. This is how Jane's story ends, unfortunately, so I presume the boys left, but knowing what I know about the BEK, they probably taunted her a little bit beforehand, but without more information from the witness herself, I guess we'll never know how that encounter ended up. I think that when people let them in, we don't get a lot of accounts of people letting them in because those people get fed off of and get sick and or die and or abducted. I don't know. So I can safely say, in my opinion, she at least didn't let them in. If you guys want to hear more on the BEK, I do have 2 videos up already about them, but I am planning on making a 3rd, so don't worry. Another encounter with a hooded figure also took place in West Virginia, this time in Flatwoods, which is located in Braxton County, and the town itself has less than 300 people in it. Small town USA, if you will. Almost quite literally, though. The landscape is filled with woods and hills, beautiful flora, and it's very picturesque. A place where you would go if you wanted to get away for a while from the hustle and bustle of city life. Not somewhere you'd want to go if you wouldn't want to be noticed, though, as with only 300 people in the whole town, a newcomer or stranger would stick out like a sore thumb. Flatwoods became somewhat famous for being the site of one of the most legendary UFO encounters in the 1950s. On September 12, 1952 to be exact, something terrifying, unexplainable, extraterrestrial, and definitely evil paid Flatwoods a visit. Here is how the story goes. Quote, Kathleen May, who was one of the key witnesses to the monster, described it as green, but others say it was a shiny metallic black that maybe reflected the green of the nearby bushes. It was dark, and they only saw the creature for a few seconds by the view of the flashlight. The entity had been referred to as, quote-unquote, the green monster. The witnesses described the monstrous form as having a red, glowing, non-human round head, and a large, circular, pointed cowling appeared behind the head in the shape of an ace of spades. All of the witnesses agree on the hood-like shape, end quote. My source material brought up a good point made by Stephen Wagner, who says of definitively supernatural entities, quote, experiences with dark hooded entities seem to be relatively common in the reports of ghost-like beings. Usually, but not always, they appear in the dead of the night in the shadowed corners of a room. They can be intimidating, foreboding, and downright terrifying. Are they products of the deep recesses of our imaginations where fear and uncertainty lie? Archetypes of what we dread about the unknown? Or are they real entities from some twilight dimension with some nefarious agenda we cannot comprehend? End quote. These are all very relevant and very important questions all of us in this community, experiencers and non-experiencers alike, should be asking ourselves all the time. In my first video I did about the Men in Black, I mentioned the story of Albert Bender, and he was, as far as I can tell, and if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me, the man who basically put the MIB on the map. He has what many consider to be, and I totally agree, the first modern day encounter with the elusive, terrifying, and mysterious entities. Not at all like what we see in the movies. Anyways, Albert Bender's cousin also had encounters with an entity in black, repeatedly, night after night, only he was being visited by a woman in black, a WIB. Short side note here real quick, I've tried so hard to find enough credible information, witness statements, encounter stories, and source material to do an entire video on this woman in black entity, but this seems to be the only documented case that's credible and accepted by most in this community as true. Let's call Albert's cousin John for the sake of this video. 3 nights in a row, John was visited and terrified by a woman in black. She was scary and aggressive, almost like a succubus. He didn't know what to do or think. Keeping in mind here, I can't help but go back to the threats the Men in Black made to Albert Bender about hurting and or harming his family should he not destroy his research and stop speaking about his experiences. Unfortunately, with this encounter, I don't know how the first 3 nights went, but apparently on the 4th night, John once again awoke to what can only be described as something horrific and looking like it came straight from the bowels of hell. There was a woman, she was wearing a dark hood. She was only described in most accounts and retellings as quote-unquote a form, but definitely female. She was dressed all in black and her skin was pale and sickly looking. It looked greasy somehow and possibly fake, like she was wearing a skin mask of some kind. John was only a little boy at the time and must have been just terrified beyond description. The woman figure simply glided across the floor, heading straight for him. I'm not sure of the entire story yet, but please believe I will be covering it very soon. But somehow the boy's father knew what had been happening the previous 3 nights, and the boy probably screamed bloody murder, which alerted his dad to come charging into the room with a lit candle in his hands. He thrust the flame at the entity. Here is what Albert Bender later had to say about the incident. Quote, they could see a pale, chalky white face staring at them, end quote. As soon as the flame was thrust in her face, the disgusting, old hag-looking entity screamed an inhuman sound at the boy and both of his parents. His mother had heard the commotion and come running into her son's room as well. She saw what was going on and, like the others, was absolutely petrified. The entity's eyes went wild and she looked crazed and angry. An evil kind of anger took over her eyes, which were mere seconds ago staring down this boy as though she couldn't wait to feed off of him, or maybe this night it would have been worse. Who knows what would have happened if his father hadn't been so quick thinking. After letting out a scream that would shame the dark goddess Banshee, her eyes flitted from mother to father, child, and back again, over and over in the next few seconds. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. She stayed gone too and never bothered the family again. What is it about the hood? I haven't been able to figure it out yet. For the BEK, it seems it's meant to hide their soulless eyes for as long as possible in the hopes of tricking the human being somehow into thinking they're just a couple of kids who need a little help. I don't know why they don't know by now that this is terrifying and never going to work. I have a theory, though, that maybe they rely heavily on mind control, but sometimes it just doesn't work. I definitely would refer you back to Brian Bethel's encounter, but make sure you go straight to the horse's mouth and listen to how he tells it himself, because then you'll see what I mean. So many accounts, guys, like you wouldn't even believe it when I read about not just the BEK, but other hooded entities, other dark entities as well, of people inadvertently reaching to unlock locks despite their dread and terror, and despite the fact that they know that they're not going to do it. Anyways, as usual, I'm getting off track. What about the hood? What does it symbolize? If I ever find an answer, you'll be the first to know. All through the summer and fall of 1997 in South Devon, England, the skies were basically flooded and overrun with UFOs, strange lights, and unknown aerial vehicles. They were always there and everyone could see them. Guys, if you've never heard about this, please look it up. It's insane. nobody, they weren't trying to hide. Whatever this thing was or these things were, they weren't even like trying to hide themselves. Even more terrifying were the strange beasts that accompanied all of this phenomena in the skies. Huge flying beasts that were described as looking like jellyfish and ghostly black dogs with what were described as, quote, blazing, hate-filled eyes, end quote. Obviously, the people were terrified and didn't know what to do or what was going on. I can't even imagine. In the moonlight, robed, dark, hooded figures, which no one who encountered or laid eyes on them could identify, roamed the woods and forests of the local area and struck fear into the hearts of all who encountered them. I wonder if the witnesses became ill. Maybe not all of them, but I bet you most of them, and nobody has yet put it together, came down with one kind of illness or another. Being distracted by everything going on in the sky, who would notice a little sinus infection? They seemed to be engaging in some sort of ritual. It looked very much like what could only be described as ritualistic in occult activity. They weren't human though, and many believed they had a connection to what was going on in the skies. Animals, both domestic, farm, and wild, were mutilated and under mysterious and unexplained circumstances while all of this was going on. So you had the stuff going on in the sky, the flying beasts, the UFOs, the lights, the aerial vehicles. Then you had the hooded, demonic figures doing rituals in the woods, and now all of the animals were being mutilated. What in the heck was going on here in this town just a couple of decades ago? Nobody ever came to any kind of reasonable explanation or conclusion, and the governments never spoke of it one way or another. Could it be that they had no relation at all to what was happening above the town? Like, could it be that everything was its own separate entity or separate occurrence? All of the extraterrestrial and UFO activity, I really don't know. Could it be possible that these entities and the hideous mutilations weren't connected at all? What about all of these hooded figures I mentioned? What about all of the hooded figures and entities I haven't mentioned? What about the ones that lurk that we don't see but somehow know they're there? Are they all connected? How would we ever possibly know? I believe some are extraterrestrial, some are demonic, others still are from other realms and dimensions, time travelers. Mainly what I wanted to discuss here and what I believe wholeheartedly is that many of them do indeed make us sick. Not just physically, but I believe they cause a lot of, dare I say it, most of today's mental illnesses as well. While I'm on the subject, let me also mention the spiritual damage all of this terror and feeding does to the human mind, body, and soul. And I think that that's the main thing, the spiritual feeding. Before you disagree or just toss these ideas aside, please think about it, especially if you yourself are an experiencer. That's all I have for you today, guys, and I'm trying to shorten my outro a little bit because it's getting repetitive and redundant, but I want you guys to check out everything I do throughout the week, so please do me a favor and check out all of the links to all of the live streams I'm a part of throughout the week. So the Oracle reading on my channel, Paranormal Chop Shop on Friday, and SOR After Hours on Saturday and Sunday. More info in the description box and links to those live streams. Also, I only have a very few like short encounter stories from you guys that came in, which is why you haven't seen a listener encounter video in a really long time. So if you want to send them in, your experiences with the supernatural, paranormal, extraterrestrial, everything in between, I got you. GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. You can remain anonymous. You can go by whatever name you want to go by. And if you want to just discuss something with me and keep it between us, I'm always interested. I'm always interested in learning more. If you'd like a personal intuitive oracle reading from me, please contact me at MoonBearOracle@gmail.com, and that's MoonBearOracle@gmail.com. Both of those email addresses will also be in the description box. Guys, if you didn't know, Moon Bear Oracle is up and running on YouTube once a month. Intuitive oracle readings for each astrological sign, and eventually it's going to be once a month and once a week. But I'm also going to be talking about crystals, candles, herbs, pretty much anything that comes up, anything magical, spiritual. I'm going to be talking about your astrology a lot. I'm going to be doing so many videos on that channel besides the Intuitive Oracle. I'm just getting it up and running. So please go on over there and subscribe. I've been having trouble putting the link to the channel in the description box. If you want to make a donation to the channel, in the description box, you will find links to PayPal, Cash App, Amazon wishlist, gift link, or to become a Patreon where you get exclusive early release videos. That's kind of what I'm doing right now, but I plan on bringing a lot more to the Patreon. My book, the link for that will also be in the description box, and that's Missing the Fae Theory by Gemma Jade. You can find that on Amazon, the paperback and Kindle version. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. My outro still ended up being super long, but I'm working on condensing it. All right. Smile at a stranger this week, guys. Always go in grace. Never accept anything less than others being kind to you, and I will see you next time. Bye.